Good morning, everyone. What a cool venue this is. It's a real pleasure to be here, and on behalf of Microsoft to get us started today. I'm Harvey Eagle. I'm the director of Azure Gaming, and it's my job to work with game developers in the UK to help them with their cloud services and use the Azure platform. And when we were thinking about what would be most interesting for you over the course of the next half an hour, my first thought was that I would just run you through some of the solution areas that Azure covers and really go into a bit of depth there. But I didn't really want this to be a sales pitch. So I then thought about maybe I could tell you about some of the amazing partners who use our Azure platform today to make incredible games. And there are some really big franchises in there. Games like Minecraft, Halo, Roblox. But then I thought, actually, really the best thing to do would be to have one of our partners come up and talk to you a little bit about why they've chosen to use Azure to build their games. And this is a partner who is not affiliated with Microsoft directly, and therefore has made a decision to choose Azure. And so to hear about why they chose Azure and how they've implemented it in their game, I'm delighted to welcome someone who actually has got on a plane from Copenhagen to be with us this morning, from the amazing IO Interactive, creator of the Hitman franchise. Please welcome Christian Corsano.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, I'm Christian Corsano, and I work at IO Interactive, as Harvey just said. And just a quick word about IO Interactive. So we're based in Copenhagen. We've been around for quite a while. The company was founded in '98. We now have 3 studios as well, so we've been expanding over the last few years. We have one in Copenhagen, we have one in Malmö, just across the bridge in Sweden, and we have one in Barcelona. And we are sort of newly independent since 2017. So you might know us for some games such as Freedom Fighters, Mini Ninjas, or Ken and Lynch, but really, obviously, you know us because of that guy, Agent 47 from the Hitman series of games. So Hitman, same thing. It's been around for a while now. There's been 8 AAA titles in the series. And today, I'm going to focus on the 3 that I was directly involved in as a lead online programmer, which is Hitman, just Hitman. So that can be confusing. If you hear me talking about Hitman, that would be that game, Hitman 2 and Hitman 3. And they are part of what we now call the Hitman Trilogy. And by the way, it's now available on Game Pass. So if you have a Game Pass subscription, just grab Hitman 3. You can play all the levels from all the 3 games in that one with all the new features. So what is Hitman exactly? Let's get some context out. Hitman, there's no way escaping it. At the end of the day, it's a game where you'll have to kill someone. You have a target, you'll have to take that target down. But it's not a shooter. It's not something where you will just get your gun out and just go gun blazing. That usually means that you did something wrong along the way. It's a puzzle game, really. You will enter some master-crafted levels, sandbox levels, with fully simulated AI. And you'll have to study that level. You'll have to discover that clockwork and find how it can be that little grain of salt that will derail the whole machinery and help you take your target out. It values discovery, patience, and beauty of execution. We are making our own tech for that game, meaning that we want to be sure to have the creative power to implement things the way we need. So Hitman, that game from 2016, at that point, we had shipped Hitman Absolution. Hitman Absolution was the first game to be powered by the new version of our engine, Glacier 2. It was a more cinematic experience. It was also a bit more linear than the previous game. So for Hitman, what we wanted is to bring back the core of the series, the freedom of approach, the exotic location you travel to make your hit. We wanted to introduce that world of assassination to the world. And one thing we knew as well is that our levels, our locations, our content is very deep. It takes time to explore. It takes time to experience. So we decided to invite the players on a journey, a more extended journey, something that will last longer than just rushing through the game. And to do that, we made a few decisions. First, we made the decision to ship Hitman 2016 as an episodic game. We would try to release a first level, after a couple of months, release another, etc., for the best part of a year. We didn't keep that model for the two next games, Hitman 2 and Hitman 3, but it really made sense because of that content, because of how deep these levels are, and wanted to have players experience them progressively, being able to deliver new content to them once in a while on this location. So the key was we wanted to make that a live service. We wanted to make Hitman a service game where we could go in and add content regularly to it. It also meant that we wanted to make that game online, even if it's still a single-player game. But we really trusted that we could bring something to the players by extending their stay in the game that way. So why is it and what it is that we wanted online? Well, there was this thing in Hitman Absolution that really caught my attention and everyone's attention who played that game. It was called Contracts Mode. Contracts Mode was not assigning a mission to the player, letting them enter a level and choose who was the target and how they wanted to kill that person. And then you were able to get the player to add some constraints that they kill that target with that specific weapon or any of this, and save that online and challenge the community with it. So the idea of Hitman was that we would take that sort of an afterthought that shipped with Absolution and make that core to the game. So we re-implemented that feature, and that feature of the re-implementation is powering all the mission for that whole Hitman Trilogy. That allows us to have a better contracts mode and also to start thinking about how can we use that tech to bring more content on these same locations and not just have a static mission. We also made scoring online because we have a pretty strong competitive scene on Hitman. People want to beat the game faster and in different ways. So scoring is now driven by events that we send to the backend, and we can change the rule set, adjust it, evolve that scoring over time if we need to. The player profile, of course, in any online game is important. We want that profile to be able to follow the player along. And all of this sort of play within some context of content delivery. How do you make your game live? It can be hard. If you are relying solely on patching, you won't be able to have a beat more than 1 month apart. Patching is hard. If you have 7 platforms like we have on Hitman, coordinating release management on all these queues, and that's more than 7, by the way, because you have multiple queues per platform potentially, it's impossible to achieve that on a more than monthly basis. So if you want daily or weekly beats, you need to go in a different way. You need to be able to deliver content from an online server. So going about this constraint and designing Hitman, we had a very nice small team to work with, and we had a key element, which was an embedded game designer. So we were not building online tech only, we were really building part of the game. We are building game features. We were able to get into that game dev process of prototyping, exploring, iterating, finding the fun, finding what ticks, and be able to just find new ideas thanks to that. And we found some. We found some new features that we didn't necessarily plan from the get-go. I was talking about content delivery. Well, part of delivering content is also exposing it to the player. What we ended up having on all these 3 games is updatable menus from the backend. We have a system where we can, within minutes, change menu pages, display new content, adjust game modes, thanks to our backend. We also found some new playful way to experience the game, such as the escalations game mode. Escalations is taking that contracts system and exposing a very simple mission to the player, kill that guy with that set of time, and then add more complication on the next level. So for instance, kill that guy with that weapon. And you can do that in a series of contracts that get more and more difficult and can potentially turn the thing around on the last level. On the other end of the spectrum, so that was very playful, we have elusive targets, and that's something that is way more hardcore. Elusive targets are a limited time event. For 10 days, you have a new NPC, a new character appear in one of the locations. It got a completely different look, completely new storyline in that location. And the key thing is that it's only there for 10 days, and you only have one shot at him. Meaning, once that target is killed, when it's dead, you cannot replay that game again. It's gone. You need to be sure to escape safely, else you will face the mission forever. And it's obviously a very constrained game mode for players, but it's also a very powerful experience. I can tell you that to this day, I remember every single target I hit or I missed back in 2016. So, another one, and the last example of this, is we were exploring multiplayer for Hitman 2, and we shipped a mode that is called Ghost Mode in that game. At that time, during prototyping, our network stack wasn't quite ready to support this. There was a lot of blockers, and we still wanted to see what was that mode worth, what was the value. So we just made it with our online backend that was ready at that time. It obviously not something that you would ever ship, but it worked, and we could explore a little bit that game mode and decide, yes, let's make it, let's ship it. So, I've been talking a lot about the backend, about servers, but we're a game company, we're a small team. How do you build that for millions of players? How do you build for the cloud? And for us, it was focusing on added value only, right? It's not about making a huge amount of IT infrastructure you'll have to maintain. We don't have the team for that. We don't have the expertise for that. We write software. This is what matters to us. We write our backend. And we want a solution that allows us to run that backend easily with our small team. And you want to think big, obviously. It was 2016, it's now 2022. You want to scale up. You want to be able to accommodate for millions of players. So you need a solution that scales. But you also want to keep your costs down, especially during production and when you don't have that many players. So you need to find that balance. And pretty early on, we chose to go with Microsoft Azure. And back in the days, it was not only the platform as a service leader, it was actually pretty much the only option. The competitors were not there yet when we started. So it was a pretty natural choice, given that we did not want to manage a lot. We wanted to let the platform work for us, to go for Azure. Another thing is, we are developing every day on Visual Studio. Our game is in C++, our tooling is in C# on .NET. So having an environment where these are first-class citizens, of course you can write for Azure on any technology stack you have, that was a key difference because we would be much more comfortable using that extensive tooling provided by Microsoft on Azure. And we ended up using it a lot over the years. So this is some random icons I pulled from our production environments. We have a lot of services running production. I won't obviously go on each one of them right now. And another thing is that we won't have time to go too deep into the technical details of our architecture, but I still managed to pick a few examples. So ranking simplest to more complicated, one thing we identified along the way when developing is that the first thing you want is for the game to retrieve some configuration. Because you don't want necessarily to have to hard code a lot of endpoints. You want to be able to be flexible there. So we came up with a very simple service called our configuration gateway, which is hosted on an Azure app service, which is basically a web app running on Azure. It's a .NET Core project. It's extremely simple, extremely efficient. It's just returning some static cache data, but that's super flexible. It means that we can redirect the game to whatever we want. If we have different branch of the game, it can actually fetch a different configuration based on that. So very simple service, very, very useful, and yeah, running just fine on Azure, super fast. Another thing is that you might want to take some metrics out of your player base, know how the game is running, how it's not running, how players are experiencing it. So you need an analytic pipeline, and you need to collect metrics for that. Same thing, just pull together a small ASP.NET application, run that on an app service, and just pushes these events, these metrics, to a set of Event Hub. Same thing, we can redirect things as we will. So talking about analytic, let's dive a little bit deeper into that. We are not a data company. We're not super experienced analytic people, especially back then. But we still managed to put something together with some help and operate it all these years and get some data out of it. So these events that we push to Event Hub go then to something called stream analytics, which is near real-time processing. You can have some rules there. Well, we do use some of these rules to pipe some data back, but we also just write things to flat files. These flat files will then be analyzed with a Hadoop cluster overnight, and some structured data will be saved to storage. Some will go directly to SQL Server for analysis and displaying it on reports in Power BI. And all of that is orchestrated by that service called Data Factory, which is a pretty nice way to put a solution together to make your data flow. Another challenge we have is to deal with some sort of security matters, such as establishing the identity of your players. One thing on the cloud is that at some point, if you're already going cloud native with your application, you'll have to test in the open somehow. So you want your gatekeeping, your authentication to work well. And we do have some very specific needs in the gaming industry. We have a lot of platforms to support. We have a lot of ways to establish the identity of the player in the game. So we went to build such a service that will be able to work with all these platforms and issue authentication token, secure token for the game. So this is our authentication service. On the service we use there, it's storing using Cosmos DB, which is a document store. We use some Redis for caching. We have application insight for monitoring. This is application insight and Key Vault that I've written there are used pretty much all over our solution. Key Vault is extremely useful. Just use it if you have anything to do with secret management, even potentially for internal software as well, just to avoid to keep any secret in version control. It's a great bit of product. So the core of what we're doing, of course, is a backend. That's what we care the most about. The rest was supporting services. This is where some of the game logic will be executed. And we built this backend originally in .NET Framework and hosted that on a now classic, almost deprecated service that's called Cloud Services. Well, we rewrote that and we actually migrated Hitman 2, the Hitman 2 backend to that new solution over the last few years. And we built that with .NET Core and Orleans. Orleans is a super interesting project. It was part of Microsoft Research. Now it's an open source .NET Foundation project, still pretty much driven by Microsoft. Orleans is a virtual actor framework. That might not mean necessarily much to you, but just think of it as a way to design distributed application very easily and to think differently on how you build these applications. And that allows us to have a very nicely scalable, nicely architectured backend to run logic for each of our players. We host that on Service Fabric nowadays. We have two groups of services. One is a web front end, one is a worker, and they can scale independently. So it's actually working pretty well. We also use a bunch of different kind of storage for that. We have Azure Table, which mixes nicely with Orleans. So we are storing most of the user data there. We have SQL Server for more structured data. We also have some extra services, Redis for leaderboard storage, real-time leaderboards. Also some Azure Search for content discovery for user-created content. That was kind of an application view of our backend. This is more an Azure resource view. So there we have a group which is more of sort of an infrastructure group, even if it's all managed services. It's the set of VMs that run these services. That's what actually scales up. But this cluster can host multiple backends, for instance, for our development environment. So we have, for each instance of this backend, service groups that contain the persistent data and whatever the application needs to run. So that's what we ended up with. There's something about the process, how we get into that mindset of running, building a live service. That's really about DevOps. Our team has been responsible for building the software, deploying it, and operating it over time. And it starts with prototyping. So how do you work with Azure when going through that phase of prototyping? Well, it's pretty simple, really. You can just use the Azure portal. Some find it a bit obscure or complex. I find it pretty consistent in the end, even if it's quite a bit of a software. But at least you can configure your service quickly and it can help you get started and put your services together. So for instance, you can just go on Azure and let's say you want to run some .NET code and you want to run that in a consumption plan, meaning serverless. You just create a function app. That UI will guide you to put together whatever is needed for that function app to work, and poof, you have your services running. If you are in that prototyping phase, chances are you can just go in Visual Studio, right-click your project, and publish from there. So an interesting fact is that you just then created a resource group, and I think that's one of the more powerful features for us on Azure. It's a great way to isolate resources composing a service that is, well, kind of unmatched on other cloud service providers that I experience. That's why I'm putting it there. It's much easier to keep an overview of the different services composing one of your features or one of your solution using that. It's also way easier to spot if your pricing will match what you expect, because then you can look at the cost for that very specific resource group after a couple of days, if you are within expectation or higher. So that's what that resource group that we just created could look like, a bunch of services. Now, one of the most interesting parts about that resource group as well is how do you move from that prototyping phase to more of a, during development phase where you have to iterate more often with your service. And this is about automation. This is about getting that new addition to your product, to your CI/CD pipeline, getting it to deploy with confidence. And one feature that we've been using a lot for that is just exporting. You just go to that resource group, click export, and you'll get all the definition for your services that you configured easily through the portal as one big JSON file. And that's an Azure Resource Manager file, a template definition with all the parameters. And what you want to do with this is, well, at this point, probably throw it away and use it as a reference, because there's a lot there and it's not super readable from the get-go, especially since something we've been migrating to and using a lot. Azure now support a dedicated domain-specific language to write those, which is called Bicep. And we've been enjoying rewriting our automation using that. It's much easier, it's much more readable, it's much more maintainable. And it got great tooling support in, for instance, Visual Studio Code to get auto-completion, and you get back in control of designing this resource group in a much more efficient way. And don't get me wrong, automation is hard. It's a very tedious job. It takes a lot of time, a lot of iteration time. We had to integrate with our TeamCity, CI/CD pipeline. That's what we used to build the game, so it was natural to have our automation there. But while this is a very tedious work and take a lot of time, it's extremely valuable. The amount of confidence you gain by having a proper deployment pipeline running is tremendous. Plus, if you're lucky enough to have Azure Devops to build your tool with, you probably skip a bunch of PowerShell scripting and use built-in tasks for that. This is an example of our automation. This is our TeamCity build chain for Hitman 3, for the production server. And we fit in there everything, including building the service, running unit tests, of course, preparing using custom tooling some of the data and content that we need to pack and ship to the game. And then even once deployment is complete, we have a suite of integration tests, running some workload against the server to check that everything is reacting as we intend. And when that chain is green, we get pretty confident with ourselves. We know that we haven't broken everything in a very bad way, so it's really good to have around. And that's the part of operations that we've been running on our team as well. So continuous deployment, writing that custom tooling, and establishing processes. We weren't in the live title business before Hitman, so we had to grow, we had to establish how to work with a live title. That includes things such as, okay, how do you formalize incident response? How do you write this report? How do you make sure that this incident you had, and we had a few, doesn't happen again? An example of monitoring, this is the monitoring for all three production environments, Hitman 1, Hitman 2, Hitman 3. It's quite a lot. to watch. But it's also a good indication, if you're used to it, to see if anything is completely wrong. If you start seeing reports that something is down, you can just go there and try to identify in what area the problem might be. For that, we use Application Insight. And that's a service we really like from the get-go. I think we even shipped Hitman 1 while it was still on preview, and that was our main monitoring solution at the time. You can then set alerts on Application Insight so that your team knows when something goes wrong. It has some auto-detection, anomaly detection there. And another kind of monitoring you want to have is cost monitoring. As I said, cloud is expensive. You want to only use what you need there, and you want to keep an eye on it. And Azure has a very nice cost management page on the portal that you can use to deep dive into your costs and into what service is actually causing that spike that you are seeing this month. So, how are things going for Hitman on Azure? We've been live now for more than 6 years. As I said, Hitman shipped in 2016, and it's been a never-ending drop of content, renewing content, shipping a new game even, of course, because we had Hitman 2 and Hitman 3 shipped since then. We shipped more than 20 of these huge location, deep level design, master-crafted location. We had also, if you take all 3 titles, more than 50 million players try it out or just go with us with our journey. Keep in mind, we also have a free version of the game available. We had that since 2017. So a lot of people have been coming and discovering what that Hitman thing was. It's still going. This is our March planning. So Hitman 3 is still seeing weekly drop of content, easy target, new game mode, etc. We had a January release where we introduced PC VR. If you haven't tried Hitman in VR, you should. It's hilarious. It's a great addition to the game. We had, of course, the Game Pass release in January as well, Steam release as well, so we have added one more platform to the mix for this game. And we have more coming this year. We announced a mode that is called Freelancer that will bring a whole new refreshing experience to the game. It will really be something that player would get to enjoy for a long time, so it would be great. And we even have a new of this map, so one more coming out later in the year. So overall, concluding a bit, after all these years, Hitman 3, so the latest installment of that World of Assassination we established, is still going, strong. We are still seeing weekly drop of content, still providing new way for the players to experience the game. And investing in that online tech unlocked key opportunities for us to be able to develop, establish that service, and establish that new way of interacting with the game from our players. And overall for us, that early choice of going on Azure was really unlocking a pretty amazing toolbox of services we could use. I think any game studio can leverage that as well. Javi, back to you. One last thing is that IO Interactive is growing, as I said. So we are hiring. Don't be shy. Feel free to drop on that career page and see if there's anything for you there. Thank you.
Christian, thank you so much. Thank you for coming over and for such an articulate explanation of how you're using Azure in your amazing game. Thank you so much. Hey, listen, just closing us out, I just want to make a plug actually for a brand new program that Microsoft has just launched recently, which is really designed to help independent developers get started on their cloud journey. It's called IDEA Azure, and it's a program that essentially gives you a few things for free, and everybody likes free programs, but you get access to up to $5,000 of Azure credits. You get access to PlayFab subscriptions. You get access to some terrific support options in Azure Rapid Response, PlayFab ticketed requests, and you also get access to our education portal where you can find lots of documentation, tutorials. We're running office hours with our cloud gaming experts. And this is just a really great way that if you're thinking about experimenting on Azure and you just want to try it out at no cost whatsoever, then please have a go. Please go to azure.com/ID where you can enroll in the program and get started. I'm here through the rest of the day. Whether you're an independent developer or whatever size of developer you are, if you're interested to have a conversation about Azure and how we can help you, then please come find me throughout the day or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thanks very much for your attention. Thank you.